To Inverness now on BBC One Scotland for live coverage of the first day of the Scottish Liberal Democrats Party Conference.
Welcome to Inverness on the first day of the Scottish Liberal Democrat Conference here in the Eden Court Theatre. Now, the party is very much turning its attention now to the Scottish parliamentary elections in just over a year's time and to the tantalising possibility that they just might win a share of government. There's been much speculation about coalitions with Labour or the Scottish National Party, but the official line is that the Lib Dems are strictly equidistant from the two other main parties. However, the prospect of power hasn't exactly inspired Liberal Democrats into turning out here en masse in Inverness. Indeed, only a dozen or so had made it to the Eden Court Theatre when the Liberal Democrat MP Ray Meahy endeavoured to get the conference started this morning.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to ask that we decide to start at 10:30 instead of 10 o'clock. I will meanwhile go out and about in the highways and byways to try and find the people who are supposed to be interested in cows to come in. So I think the sensible thing is that we go for a 10:30 start. Thank you.
Well, half an hour later, Mrs. Meahy moved the conference out of the main hall and into a smaller room for the few delegates who had arrived. Well, if a number of them couldn't make it this morning, they're not alone. The party leader, Paddy Ashdown, hasn't either. He's in Bosnia, we gather. And his place today will be taken by the deputy leader, Alan Beath. We'll be hearing from him later. We'll also be hearing from the Treasury spokesman, Malcolm Bruce, who's been urging the Scottish Party to commit itself to a policy of not raising taxes in the Scottish Parliament. Well, the conference is now underway. The delegates have turned up. So let's go over now to my colleague in the commentary box, David Porter.
Ian, thank you very much and welcome to the hall, where I'm pleased to say that a few more of the seats are filled at the moment. We've just begun a debate on the tourism industry, a very important industry here in Scotland with something like 177,000 people. That's 8% of the workforce employed in the industry, and it creates something like £2.5 billion for the Scottish economy. In areas like Inverness in the Highlands, the industry is even more important. It accounts for something like 20% of the workforce, but by its very nature, it's a very seasonal industry. At the moment, the man who is introducing the motion, Sir Robert Smith, is explaining what can be done and indeed what Liberal Democrats would like to see to improve the industry and perhaps make it less seasonal and perhaps bring more people in for short breaks into Scotland. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Exciting and forward-looking benefit of having a Scottish Parliament to provide that critical mass for debating these issues. In addition, there is a secondary benefit of the Scottish Parliament, which may in the end be more important in creating a greater identity for Scotland in terms of the vision of Scotland from abroad. If we improve the image of Scotland and the focus of Scotland, then we can improve the marketing and the persuasion of people to come and visit Scotland and to take advantage of all we have to offer here in terms of the attractions for tourism. Also within a party policy document, there's so many areas that affect any one area. And quite clearly, later today we'll be debating support for business. Well, tourism is a business, so what we say later is equally relevant to all the small businesses that provide much of the work in the tourism industry. And anything we can do to make life easier and simpler for the small businesses to thrive and to help promote small businesses as the growth area in tourism will benefit tourism as well as any other business. Secondly, again, at a strategic level, reliable information is crucial to tourism making the best use of the people that want to come here. I'm staying at Carbridge for this conference, and we phoned up National Rail inquiries, and they said Carbridge didn't exist, it didn't have a station. Now, a lot of people locally will know that Carbridge does have a station and trains stop there, but if a tourist phones up, they want to go to Carbridge and visit the attractions there, and they get told there's no station and no train there, that's business lost to the local economy. So it's crucial to have a reliable source of integrated transport information. And I think again, centrally, the bringing together is not just trains. People want to get from A to B. It's not necessarily the mode that matters. And if they can make one call and get the information they need to make their decisions, you're more likely to attract them into the local economy. The next thing is there's talk in the paper about information technology, getting more information also locally. I think So many areas are looking at expanding the use of information technology, and it's a frightening capital outlay. I think there are going to have to be imaginative ways of working with other providers of information, local authorities, libraries and community centres that are all breaking into the information technology arena. One computer and one screen can actually provide you with information not just for tourism, but for your local health service, for local job centre, for all sorts of other information. I think all the different providers of information, especially in our more rural areas, are going to have to get together and share some of the costs of this infrastructure and then share the benefits jointly. Because I think that's the crucial thing. People have to realise that in promoting or helping another organisation, they may well also benefit themselves. Thirdly, quite clearly, as the policy and I think the amendment looking at sustainable development, there's no point getting a very thriving tourist industry going in your local economy if you do it on an unsustainable basis, so that the next generation have nothing with which to benefit from and nothing with which to develop their tourist industry on. But in developing sustainable development, it must be an on-high approach from outside. It must involve the community. It must be a democratically based process in the local community. And where partnerships such as the Cairngorm partnerships are set up, there must be genuine partnerships. It's extremely arrogant of a partnership to say we want the involvement of, say, Aberdeenshire Council, but we're going to decide we're only interested in listening to your convener. The fact that Councillor Watson has been representing you all this time, we don't want her anymore, is to deny the democratic process. It's up to Aberdeenshire Council to decide who best represents and speaks for Aberdeenshire in the context of meetings like that. And it's up to bodies that want to form partnerships to recognise that the other side has to be a genuine partner and not just press-ganged. Similarly, as the policy paper highlights, in developing sustainably, we're going to have to look at ways, possibly, of protecting some of the resources where there's too much attraction, possibly with the concept, as is outlined in the paper, of park and ride, where there's an area where people can park further from the attraction and get into it in a bus. Therefore, you can manage the pressure on the environment and also bring some money locally into the economy again out of the parking charges, out of the costs of that service. So you actually get some benefit for having an attraction in the community. But finally, Liberal Democrat policies are interconnected, and it's the supportive environment that we can provide for business and specifically for tourism that will make the difference. If we can, as we have policies for boosting training and education, if you can't have trained and educated people to come in and work in the industry, you can't expand the industry. Clearly, our whole transport infrastructure, the need to boost that is again a benefit for the transport. The Aberdeen to Inverness line is clearly in need of upgrading, and rail tracks so far not willing to do so. The P&J are now running a campaign to try and encourage rail track to see the long-term needs of the communities at each end. And it's a very important part that the Scottish Parliament is going to have to look at in the laws we build for the Scottish Parliament. At the moment, it looks like it's going to have a lot of control over roads, but not necessarily much input into railways. But whether people go by road or rail, again, is quite important in your transport planning. And I think we're going to have be able to have some overview of the transport infrastructure in Scotland. And finally, and crucially, to an industry that relies a lot on importing, persuading people to come to this country or persuading people in this country to stay here and not go abroad for their holidays, is the whole economic climate. The exchange rate at the moment is unstable and worrying to anyone making a long-term plan for their future in business. And we have argued with the Chancellor that there's two mistakes he's possibly making. One is he can't, just because he's made the Bank of England independent, disown all responsibility for the actions of the Bank of England, because he knows the rules under which they operate. And his budget affects what the Bank of England can or cannot do. And therefore he has to be conscious of the consequences of his budget on interest rates and the exchange rate. Secondly, we would argue the government have to make up their minds and make it clear which way this country is going in terms of the single currency, and to hold the referendum now so that the British people can make their mind up, decide which way they're going, and tell the markets whether we're going into the single currency or not. We would be arguing that they should be going in when the time's right, and that the country should endorse the need strategically to go in. But it should clear the air. At the moment, we have a government that say they're going to wait 5 years till they make their mind up about a single currency, and an opposition party that say they're going to wait 10 years. These are just numbers plucked out of the air. They have no strategic significance whether it's 5 or 10 years. It's much more important to make a clear decision one way or the other and send a signal to the market. Because it's our belief in our Treasury team that if a clear signal was sent to the market that this country had an intention of joining the single currency, That would help to take some of the pressure off the pound now, and certainly would help an industry like tourism that depends a lot on foreign money coming into this country. As I say, there's no magic solutions that come from on high for the future of tourism, but there is the right climate and the right environment in which it can grow. And I hope you will adopt these common sense proposals and pass this motion, which will at least provide the start and the healthy environment for us to build a long and sustainable tourist industry for which we can all benefit.
Sir Robert Smith there, introducing the motion on the tourism industry, saying there are no magic solutions for the industry, but more needs to be done to make sure that it grows.
To move the amendment, which is, you will see is mentioned in the bulletin. It's in the bottom of page 8 of your agenda. As you will see in the bulletin, it actually should be Roman numeral 4, not Roman numeral 4, it should be an ordinary 4.
Next up to the rostrum is Andy
Miles.
Miles.
Roy, fellow Liberal Democrats. The policy paper on tourism produced by the Policy Committee is excellent, and I would add my congratulations to those of Sir Bob Smith, to the Policy Committee and Robert Brown for their efforts. But in one vital respect, the motion doesn't truly reflect the policy paper. On the matter of the environment, the motion is too weak, and that is why Edinburgh Central seek to amend and to strengthen it. The paper points out that Scotland's natural heritage, its beauty and its wildlife, its plants, its mountains and its rivers, these are the things which tourists most enjoy about Scotland. They are the geese that lay the golden eggs of Scottish tourism. So don't kill them. We must make sure that we don't build tourist developments that damage our natural heritage. Don't build an ugly modern visitor centre smack in the middle of Glencoe and then have to demolish it and start again. Don't build a tourist experience celebrating Alfred Nobel on an important bird breeding ground on the Ayrshire coast and then have to restrict the visitors' movements to protect breeding birds. Now, at this point, I think I should declare an interest. Many of you will know that I have been appointed as the Parliamentary Officer of the RSPB Scotland, and this means that it's my job to protect the birds from politicians. I don't know whether I'm a gamekeeper turned poacher or a poacher turned gamekeeper, but one or the other. But it brings me on to perhaps the worst example of an environmental disgrace that is being put up in the name of a tourist attraction, and that is the proposed funicular railway on Cairngorm. They're planning to spend £12 million of taxpayers' money building a railway straight up the side of a mountain, right into the heart of one of Scotland's most unique, sensitive and important habitats. Important lichens, alpine plants, rare breeding dotterel and snow bunting. And although this is a skiing area, the railway's not for the skiers who don't even want it. No, it's to attract summer visitors. Now, this is the really exciting bit. Let's consider what the visitors on this railway are going to see. Well, they're going to see the inside of a tunnel. That's unique. And then, 2 days out of every 3, because remember, this is a very high mountain in Scotland, they're going to see the inside of clouds. We do get them occasionally. And then they're going to see the inside of an expensive cafeteria. And then they're going to find out that they're not allowed out of the expensive cafeteria, because Scottish National Heritage would only withdraw their objection to the scheme after it was agreed that the visitors be stuck inside the cafe. They won't even get to the top of the mountain, because the cafeteria is 400 feet below the top of the mountain. Some visitor attraction. So the 225,000 tourists a year are not going to really have a great time, except that, of course, now we're told that it's actually down to 160,000. And after the tour operators discover how bad the tourist experience is, there'll be even less. And the mountain climbers won't use the railway because they can't get out of the cafe onto the mountain. At the end of the result, what you have here is an environmentally damaging scheme that, frankly, with its environmental protections written in, they're not worth the paper they're printed on, because eventually they're going to have to become a situation where you allow people onto this mountain. The funicular railway is a white elephant. What you need there is a genuine partnership, and I agree wholeheartedly with Bob, a genuine partnership of local and national interests to make sure that our tourist attractions are environmentally sound. We don't need any more disastrous developments. Tourists come here for our natural heritage. Let's be sensible and make sure that these things get better, not worse. Vote for the amendment.
And of course, the former Chief Executive of the Scottish Liberal Democrats and now the Parliamentary Officer of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Birds.
Alistair wants to speak against the motion.
Yeah. Now, naturally, I do find things in the policy paper which are good. The emphasis on investment and the need for training are things we can welcome. There is also a splendid spelling mistake if you turn to page 8 of the policy document to the second line. Either it's a spelling mistake or it's some sort of revealing Freudian slip. But what I do object to in this policy paper is a rather unfortunate, snooty, elitist tone. The aim of quality or niche markets, which is set out, apparently primarily to encourage wealthy American visitors. Now that's fine in itself, but to set up niche marketing, that is to say holidays for bird watchers and golfers and so forth, and quality marketing, which is holidays for people with lots of money, as being necessarily in opposition to the mass market, which is holidays for ordinary people, and then write off the mass market, is unnecessary, it's illogical, and it's elitist. Unnecessary because we can in fact have both. Illogical because both provide income. And elitist? Well, I just quote to you from the document. B&B sounds less exciting than holidaying in a gîte. Well, to who does it sound less exciting? I would suggest that there probably are people, ordinary people, shall we say just hypothetically, an ordinary retired couple from Newcastle, to whom staying in B&B in Scotland sounds reassuring. It's something they're familiar with. They've had a hospitable reception in the past, whereas holidaying in a gîte may sound elitist and exclusive. Now, the authors of the policy paper tell us Scotland is unlikely to become a mass tourist destination. I beg to differ. There were over 12 million visitor trips to Scotland in 1996. That may not rival Florida or compare with Majorca, but it is still twice the normal inhabitant population. In other words, setting up a policy which is based on an opposition between niche and quality marketing on the one hand and mass tourism on the other is actually to turn our backs on existing business. And there is, of course, a dynamic in all of this. The young people from Western Europe and North America who come around Scotland with backpacks today may very well come back as the quality, that is to say, the people with money market in 20 years' time. So it's not necessary to differentiate the two and try and dump one of them. Thank you. The other thing which I just want very briefly to touch on is the complete omission from the policy paper of any mention of toilets. A very simple, straightforward, but fundamental point. All over Scotland, local authorities, hard-pressed for money, are shutting down public toilets. In eastern Bartonshire, where I come from, the council has closed 6 toilets in the teeth of strong local opposition. We had over 4,000 people signed a petition. And amongst those is the one and only public toilet at the south end of the West Highland Way. that it is used by tourists is evident to anyone who's taken the trouble to look. They actually use it as a meeting place. It's where they gather for the obvious purpose before setting off up over the moors. And I think we could do with beefing up the policy in that respect. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, there we'll leave the
Alistair.
tourism debate and return to Ian McWhirter outside the hall, where he's joined by the party's Treasury spokesman, Malcolm Bruce.
Thank you, David. Malcolm Bruce, everyone is now turning their minds to the economics of devolution. There's going to be a lot of pressure, isn't there, on the Scottish Parliament to be a tax and spend Parliament?
Well, I don't think so. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Scottish Parliament to prove that it's something different. And I think as a start, we need to have a complete reappraisal of what is being spent by the Scottish Office and how well it's being spent, whether the government is in all the areas it should be doing, whether what it's doing is sensible or efficient. What we, I think, as a party are anxious to do is demonstrate a commitment to deliver quality public services cost efficiently. And that certainly doesn't mean you rush around promising to put up taxes before you've even looked at the books.
So you wouldn't propose an early increase in the tartan tax, as it used to be called?
Obviously, the party is now debating what our ideas and priorities will be, but certainly the mood of the people I've been speaking to is a recognition that we shouldn't start by saying to the people of Scotland, look, we put up your taxes. I think we want to do a deal with the people of Scotland that says we promise you that we want to make this Parliament work and work in your interest. And that means that we're going to look at every nook and cranny of Scottish Office spending and find out if we can improve the way it's spent, if there are areas we shouldn't be in, and if we can deliver better services to you, preferably at no extra cost and even possibly at a reduced cost.
So you would be proposing a moratorium on using the current Parliament's tax-raising powers for the first session of that Parliament?
Well, how long, I think, will something we need to determine, but what is absolutely clear in my mind, and I think the party will probably back that, is that it really gives completely the wrong impression to the Scottish electorate and I think to the business community in Scotland to say, vote for us, the first thing we're going to do is put your taxes up, before we've even had a thoroughgoing look at what is being done.
But isn't that precisely your message to a UK audience? You're going to be in the anomalous position of proposing a 1p tax increase for the UK, but no tax increase in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, no, because we'd always said that our commitment to put a penny on income tax was if necessary. Now, for the last 2 years, we've deemed it was necessary given the current state of public finances. UK finances are improving very dramatically, and the Barnett formula should ensure that Scotland gets a share of that. And secondly, we have the opportunity, which we haven't had, frankly, with the UK books, to look root and branch at everything that's going on in the Scottish Office. And I think our responsibility to the Scottish electorate is to do that first and only then determine whether or not we should put up taxes.
But you've been criticising the government for its attitude to local authority finance. I mean, will there not be a great deal of pressure to use the tartan tax, if you like, to ease the situation facing the councils in Scotland?
Now, over time, it may be necessary to increase taxes in Scotland and possibly even in the UK, but I don't think that is the right place to start. And I think you have far more credibility, I believe, with the electorate if you say, look, let us have a proper look at everything first. Let's determine whether money is being wasted that could be better spent. Let's look and see whether or not we can get a better partnership, and indeed we can do things to expand the private sector in Scotland and therefore generate more prosperity. If we can do all of those things, it may be possible to deliver better services for no extra cost, and we certainly shouldn't put up the taxes before we've done that.
Well, you're even suggesting there that taxes could be reduced in a Scottish Parliament. Now, isn't that really the economics of fantasy land? Because if you reduce taxes in Scotland, then the bloc will be reduced accordingly.
That, of course, raises a very big issue we are debating here, which is the importance of having a clear understanding of the bloc Barnett formula, because I think people in England need to understand that if Scottish Parliament has got to have a real incentive to be efficient, to scrutinise the books, to find better ways of spending money, it must be for the benefit of the people of Scotland. If all we're going to do is do it and then find the Treasury clause it back, there's not only no incentive to open the books, there's a lot of incentive to hide what's going on. And I think my challenge to English MPs is, for heaven's sake, understand you would be undermining the efficiency and effectiveness of the Scottish Parliament from day one.
Of course, we're always inclined to talk about income tax when we refer to taxation, but there are other means of raising revenue. Do you think that could be explored by the Scottish Parliament?
Yes, of course it could, and indeed by the Scottish Parliament in conjunction with local government.
Such as?
Well, I mean, I think you can increase possible charges, you can review how the business rate is impacted, but I mean, I think the important part of this debate is to have a genuine contract, if you like, with the people of Scotland that says, we promise you our objective is to provide you with good quality services, but we're not prepared just to tax and spend. We want to take this opportunity of having control of our own finances to look at them properly. And if we find money's being wasted, we'll give it you back.
Welcome, Bruce. Thank you very much indeed. Back now to David in the conference.
Thank you very much, Ian, and welcome back to the tourism debate, where we've just been hearing a plea for more to be done to South Scotland, to America, where many people have descendants who emigrated from Scotland, and more can be done, they say, to actually get people to come back and rediscover their roots in Scotland, something which could happen all year round and would get away from the seasonal nature of tourism. We've now moved on to another speaker, Cathy McGuinness from East Dunbartonshire.
It should promote a sense of pride in our country, and I don't think we really promote that pride at all. I am proud to be a Scot. Several years ago, I took some American friends to see a site in Glasgow called the Fossil Grove. It's a site which you may not have heard of. It's a small grove of trees which are fossilised. They're 93 million years old. My friends were quite fascinated by that. But really they said, well, why aren't you marketing this? Why do tourists not come? Indeed, it's very rarely visited. In the area of marketing, we must support all businesses, from small businesses to large businesses. I was concerned a few years ago when given some souvenirs, Scottish souvenirs from Crieff. The earrings I was given were made in Mexico. The book that my child was given, all about Scottish tartans, was printed in Israel. That one particularly concerns me because of the diminishing factory site at HarperCollins. HarperCollins in the East Dunbartonshire area is about 2 miles away from my home. And as an industrial tribunal representative, I'm particularly concerned about redundancies in the area. Small businesses have gone into liquidation as a result of this lack of support. We have to recognise that and recognise our own industries and our own skills, especially when we're talking about crafts for tourism. With the coming of the new Scottish Parliament, we have a new opportunity to promote our pride in Scotland. I want to send out an SOS to everyone. Settle on Scotland and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Would Mike Rumbles stand by? And I now call Patsy Kenton, who's a first-time speaker, and she's from Tayside North. Patsy.
Thank you. As the facts and figures show, tourism is very important to Scotland. Tourism is vital for the nation of Scotland, and it needs responsible, sensible policies to make us go forward with economic growth in rural areas and urban areas. And we also have to safeguard and protect Scotland's culture and natural heritage. In the paper, we have isolated objectives, created action plans to help develop the industry to its full potential. These proposals cover vital areas of funding, the structure of the industry, the environment, transport, and the need for a united strategy to identify and target the groups. In the document, funding is stressed to maintain sort of the growth rates. The problem is with funding is there's not one body that's totally responsible for funding, although the Department of Trade and Industry has overall responsibility. There are also suggestions to change the structure of the current organisation of the Scottish tourism in order to ensure a united and effective network. This is very, very good. Having been in the tourist industry for a number of years, there's an increasing problem amongst smaller businesses that our tourist boards are asking for higher and higher fees for less and less inclusive services. Tourism in Scotland is a multifaceted industry, and it attracts visitors for diverse reasons. Some come because of our beautiful landscape, some come to our bustling cities, some want adventure or fun. Targeting niche markets will enable us to isolate areas and provide the services that people want. Training and skill development is another issue which must be targeted. We aim to develop a highly motivated and skilled workforce which should be reimbursed fairly and trained and to competitive levels. As Liberal Democrats, we aim to support information technology developments in the sector. We would also aim for a yet higher quality of customer provision, and we really ought to be thinking in terms of providing language facilities so people can relate to our culture easier. The Liberal Democrats, as the Liberal Democrats, we recognise the importance of transport. And in the document, we think in terms of putting services together. Last year, the Tourist Board promoted for people cycling up to Inverness. Cycle to Inverness, we'll show you safe routes, get on a train and bring your bike back. Wonderful. People cycled up to Inverness, they arrived at the station, and they were not allowed to take their bicycles on the train back, and they had to think of private ways of getting back or having to cycle back again. Every effort ought to be made to extend the normal tourist season and to enhance off-season businesses. We can't necessarily guarantee the weather, so we have to think of all weather centres and activities such as tracing routes that makes it irrelevant whether the sun shines or not. The establishment of a Scottish Parliament offers a unique opportunity to form a sustainable, integrated national strategy involving local people, landowners, environmental groups and tourist boards. A tourist committee with wide-ranging powers able to work with and influence the different bodies, hopefully chaired by a Liberal Democrat SNP, will be of immense benefit to the country and eventually creating a high-quality and high-yield service. The Liberal Democrats show our desire to see the success of the Scottish tourist industry and the necessary steps to be taken to implement this, presenting a favourable image of Scotland to the world and gaining a favourable benefit to industry in Scotland. I recommend the acceptance of the policy paper, Scotland's Tourist Future, to the conference.
Thank you.
That speech there by Pat
Thank you,
Seacount.
Patsy, and well done. Can Keith Raffin stand by? And I now called Mike Rumbles from West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, and Mike has just recently been selected as the prospective Scottish parliamentary candidate for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. Mike.
Thanks very much, Roy. I very much welcome the publication of the document Scotland's Tourist Future and support this motion to adopt it as the party's policy on tourism in the new Scottish Parliament. In proposing this motion, Sir Robert Smith highlighted the economic importance of the tourist industry to Scotland. And I do believe that the industry, which generates 5% of our gross domestic product and accounts for about 1 in 12 of the jobs in Scotland, demands to be recognised as a major contributor to the economy. And the best way to do this is through the creation of a specific tourism committee of the Scottish Parliament. I specifically welcome references within the document to the vital role tourism plays in particular parts of the country, such as in my own area of Royal Deeside, Donside and Kincardineshire. We really would benefit from a much strengthened Scottish Tourist Board, able to develop a national tourism strategy which is needed based on establishing high-quality niche markets and extending the tourist season. And at this point, I would like to say to Alistair, you're wrong. I would say that ordinary people like good quality too. You know, there's been a terrific growth in the short break holiday within Great Britain, as people work shorter hours, retire earlier, generally have more time on their hands. Scotland must have its fair share of this growing UK market, but it is a market which demands high-quality facilities and value for money. We must rise to the challenge. We have in Scotland a tremendously rich natural resource of rivers, mountains, lochs, and to complement these, we must also have the facilities which these short-stay visitors now demand, and I resist the temptation to talk about toilets. We must develop all-weather facilities, such as, for example, in my own area, a much-needed indoor sports complex at Ballater, needed for a very long time, and promoting swimming pools in places such as Banchory and Stonehaven. If we are serious about recognising the economic value of our tourist industry, then we must allocate sufficient resources to provide the quality facilities and infrastructure that our modern tourist demands. I've just used that word infrastructure, and I suppose I'd better explain how I see that word meaning. I mean that we have to ensure that people who are leading this growth in short breaks, visitors, not from abroad, visitors from within the rest of the United Kingdom, can get to our tourist areas quickly and without ruining the very places they are keen to visit. That's why I welcome the reference particularly to establishing railways in areas such as the borders presently not served by them. And while I don't have any remit for the borders, I do have a vested interest in promoting this idea for my own area, Royal Deeside. This very week, a newly formed organisation, the Royal Deeside Railway Preservation Society, have announced that it is their aim to reinstate a light railway running from Aberdeen out to Ballater. The possibilities of new ventures such as this fits in very well with Liberal Democrat values of promoting the tourist industry and at the same time moving commuters from road to rail and looking after the environment. Ideas such as this can't succeed if left purely to the private sector. What we need is public investment in such worthy capital projects, which will lead to the betterment of all in the long run. The proposed Tourism Committee of the Scottish Parliament would be the ideal place to address issues such as this, and it won't surprise you that it's my aim to be, hopefully to be there to raise the issue of a tourist rail link from Aberdeen to Ballater at the very first meeting of this committee. I would therefore urge conference to welcome this paper and give your wholehearted support to the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Mike Rumbles there from West Aberdeenshire, Liberal Democrats' prospective parliamentary candidate for the Scottish Parliament for that seat, calling for a special committee in the Scottish Parliament to consider tourism.
Mr. Chairman, fellow Liberal Democrats, I welcome Scotland's tourist future as far as it goes, but in one important respect, I would like it to see it go much further, and that's in regard to overseas promotion. The policy paper poses the question, is there still an argument for marketing the UK as a single product, or should the Scottish Tourist Board completely take over the role of marketing Scotland abroad? It poses the question, but it doesn't answer it. It shelves it or hands it over to the proposed Scottish Parliament Tourism Committee. I believe we should take a firm, clear stance on this, that the Scottish Tourist Board should play the primary role in marketing Scotland overseas. Since 1984, since the passing of the Tourism Overseas Promotion Act, Scotland Act, Scotland has been allowed to engage in overseas marketing, but only subject to approval by the British Tourist Authority and with all representation carried out overseas through the British Tourist Authority. In fact, that's been the envy of other parts of the world, to such an extent that when I was still a Member of Parliament in 1991, I took through an identical bill to give Wales precisely those powers. Now, the powers are no good unless they're backed up by two things. One is cash, and a lot more of it than is available at the moment. And the second is to be freed from the constraint of the British Tourist Authority. Overseas promotion, overseas visitors is the fastest growing sector of our tourism industry. Expenditure by overseas tourists in Scotland since 1991 has grown by over 60%. I agree with, I think, the immediately previous speaker who criticised another one. Niche marketing is important. It's the Scottish Tourist Board that's far more able than the British Tourist Authority to carry that out effectively. The fact is that the British Tourist Authority has to concentrate on general messages. In fact, the paper says that overseas promotion has inevitably to concentrate on the central messages of scenery, history, and culture. Absolutely true. But it's not just the messages that are crucial, it's the targeting of those messages that are crucial. In such huge markets as the United States, with over 260 million people, and Western Europe, niche targeted marketing is absolutely essential if we're to realize the full potential of those markets for our economy. We have to focus in certain areas. We have to focus, for example, on those states with a high number among their population of people of Scottish descent, like North and South Carolina. I agree with the previous speaker who mentioned genealogy. I was not long ago in a remote town, rural town in Alabama, and in the shopping mall there was a stall offering to trace your Scottish ancestry. We have to target through the plethora, the multitude of Scottish organisations in the United States, and at those specifically of Scottish descent. That requires targeted marketing. I believe the Scottish Tourist Board can be far more effective at carrying that out than the British Tourist Authority. Cooperation with the BTA, yes, but firm control should reside with the STB. Thank you.
Ethan Ruffin there from Aberdeen, and incidentally, in a former life, he was a Conservative MP in North Wales, and recently was unsuccessful trying to be selected as a Liberal Democrat candidate for the Scottish Parliament in Fife.
Anybody from Edinburgh Central wants to sum up for the amendment? Okay. Right, Tavish.
Chairman, Conference, thank you. I want to today pick on a couple. I too want to mention the I word, but I want to deal with it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of roads. I know it's a little unfashionable to talk about roads today, but at a conference on Monday, which was addressed by the Scottish Transport Minister, roads were very much the thought because of how much they mean for tourism, particularly in where we are today. So in doing that, I just want to pick up a number of points. Can I just say, I think it's quite important that to look at roads in that context, that industry depends, the tourism industry depends very much as in rural Scotland on the road network. And the forthcoming white paper on transport policy is, I think, extremely important in that context, because I think tourism, both the STB and the area tourist boards and all who work in it, very much need to be part of that debate later in May. There is, however, a difference between tourism in terms of words and tourism in terms of rhetorical flourishes, which were produced by Mr McLeish earlier this week. Because certainly from the part of Scotland that I come from, Shetland, what we are facing is, in essence, barriers to entry in terms of the tourism industry. We face air passenger duty on lifeline services to the Scottish Islands, used by local people, by businessmen, and of course by visitors and tourists. The national target of that tax was the holidaymaker and the business traveller, but arguably there are other modes of transport that are available to those people. That is simply not the case in the islands. And in the absence of road links, air is an everyday necessity, but at the same time we are experiencing extremely high tariffs. What I think is concerning is that the Labour government in government have not accepted the iniquities of this Highlands and Islands poll tax and removed it for lifeline services. British regional airlines operate the Highlands and Islands franchise on behalf of British Airways. This is an airline who, in the Shetland context, have taken 18 months to accept what they were told by local people at that time, namely that direct links to the Central Belt would not only pay, but are specifically needed. 18 months has gone by before that argument has got across. This is an airline who won't accept responsibility, won't accept that they have a responsibility in the event of a no-fly until you are literally climbing the check-in desk. This is an airline that say they don't overbook flights. Why did the last flight from Aberdeen to Sombra on Saturday last have 42 pieces of luggage removed from the hold? Otherwise, 9 passengers wouldn't have got home last Saturday. They would have been left in Aberdeen for the night, which may, of course, have done something for the tourist industry. But in short, this is an airline who must do better. It's an airline, whether you're local, whether you're a businessman, or whether you're a visitor, whether you're a tourist to places like Shetland, to the Western Isles and to others, who must do better. But British Airways set the specification for BRA. They must be directly challenged to do better. The world's favourite airline must start to earn its title. A final component part, if I can just mention, is petrol prices. It's simply difficult to understand, as Mr McLeish, the Transport Minister, did on Monday, 4.5 million for rural community transport bids, and ignore the fact that petrol prices have gone up twice since Labour came to power. Rural Forum have calculated that is £30 million out of the rural economy in this period. The UK has the highest petrol prices in the European Union, but it does nothing to help tourism. It does nothing to help the rural economy, and it has everything to do with raising tax revenues to win the next election in a glorious Middle England tax giveaway. So the fine words are one thing, but what we need from government is three things. We need exemption for the islands, lifeline services, from the air passenger duty. We need government to accept that emission outputs in cities don't justify hiking petrol prices in rural Scotland. And finally, we need government to bring diplomatic but firm pressure on those who provide air services to do exactly that, provide a service. Thank you.
Thank you, Tavish.
The view of how more can be done to help tourism in the Shetland area by Tavish Scott there.
To sum up for the motion, and would Andy Miles come and sum up for the amendment? Andy.
Thank you, Roy. Fellow Liberal Democrats, I'm not in favour of waste, and as a 6-minute speech opening this debate seemed to be cut to 4. I've got 2 minutes of speech, which I don't want to get rid of. It's very good stuff. The shock horror bit. There is one type of wildlife which I'm in favour of hunting to extinction: the great white elephant. I'm very grateful to Sheila Mackay for mentioning the Skye Road Bridge, a disgrace for the people of Skye, but environmental horror as well. But I return to the biggest monster of the lot, the funicular railway that has become a totem of Highland politics. Brian Wilson and the new Labour government stick by it, even though they've admitted it's a huge financial gamble and know that the private sector wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot ski pole. Councillor Peter Peacock, convener of the Highland Council, says it's purely a local issue and no one should have a say except those in the Highland. Well, it's not just a local issue. They want it to be a national park. They want it to be a World Heritage Site. They want UK taxpayers' money and a European subsidy. Now, they may be right in getting those for tourist developments in Strathpay, but it recognises that national politics has a say too. They should be stopped from developing the developing authorities should be stopped from despoiling one of the planet's most important habitats. There are plenty of alternatives. Mike Rumbles was remarkably inventive and suggested a whole list for the other side of the Cairngorms. I have no doubt that a genuine partnership in Strathspey could come up with plenty of ways to spend £12 million on tourist developments that didn't damage the environment. That's what this amendment is about, strengthening the motion to make sure that we don't stumble into any more disastrous developments, and making sure that we find environmentally sustainable alternatives. I ask you to vote for the amendment.
Andy Miles there, the former Chief Executive of the Scottish Liberal Democrats and now of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, speaking in favour of the amendment.
Committee to sum up for the motion. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. President, and fellow Liberal Democrats. Let me thank the contributors to the debate today. I think it's been a high-quality debate with a lot of very good suggestions and thoughts in it. Now, I should say perhaps that this motion is the first of a series of policy committee motions going forward to this conference as a result of our interim review of policy with the mind to the lead up to the Scottish Parliament. And I think it's fair to say that the particular issue of tourism hasn't exactly been at the centre of our thoughts in the previous past in terms of earlier conference resolutions and the like. There's really not much in it about tourism. So this, if you like, is a first go at trying to define the sort of issues which are going to be important for Liberal Democrats. Let me say, if I may, that it's not intended to be a definitive answer. It's a step along the line, and I hope the conference delegates will take it in that particular fashion. Now, if I can deal with one or two of the points that were made during the debate and see just what our thoughts are on those. First of all, I'm delighted to accept the amendment put forward so ably by Andy Miles. I think it does strengthen the motion, and we're delighted to have it on board and ask conference to accept the amendment in due course when we come to the vote. Now, Alistair Tooke spoke against the motion. He was the only speaker to do so, and I think, if I understood him correctly, it was his issue of the contrast between mass markets and niche markets, which bothered him. Now, I think, in fact, there may be arguments about phraseology, but I think it's reasonably clear that we're not going to get in Scotland the sort of mass market that goes to Spain or to Florida with the large number of hotels, cheek by jowl, and all the rest of it. What we're going to get, I think, is a much larger number of smaller destination visits, smaller groups coming for particular purposes and so forth, who add up in total to a very large number of people. And within this large number of people, there are a number of areas which are going to be targeted by the Tourism Committee of the Scottish Parliament. One is certainly the domestic market, which is the market which has lagged behind somewhat the growth in the tourist industry generally. And I think within the domestic market, it's going to be the short break holidays that were touched upon that are going to be important. A number of the other speakers spoke about particular aspects, information technology, the business of services and transport backup and so forth. And I was particularly interested in the comments of Keith Raffin with clear, detailed knowledge of the industry. What I would like to say, though, in summing up, if I may, is we're going to have very shortly the elections to the Scottish Parliament. This is going to be an event which causes worldwide interest. It's a shopping window for Scotland, if you like. And what do we have in the lead up to it? We've got a squabble between Glasgow and Edinburgh about the site of the Scottish Parliament, not just the Parliament, the temporary site of the Scottish Parliament, and not about Glasgow and Edinburgh as such by Labour councillors and the discredited Labour leadership in the two cities about this particular subject matter. We've got to get away from this. Surely to goodness we can have a partnership between Scotland's major cities to sell the tourist industry, the attraction that Scotland has to offer to the world, and to make, if you like, a launch pad for the 21st century for the Scottish tourism industry. This paper is a beginning. I think there's good ideas and good suggestions in it. If you've got other things to add, please write into the Policy Committee and let us have your further suggestions in addition to the ones that have been made today. But in the meantime, please back the resolution and give us your support. Thank you, Chairman.
The debate being summed up there by Robert Brown, the Chairman of the Liberal Democrat Policy Committee.
To the vote. And first of all, of course, I will take a vote on the amendment. So would those who are in favour of the single amendment please show? Thank you. And those against? That is clearly carried. I now move to a vote on the motion as amended. It includes the amendment. Would those in favour please show? Thank you. And those against? It is nearly unanimous. Thank you very much
overwhelming
indeed.
Support there for the motion to say that more ought to be done to help improve Scotland's tourist industry and indeed promote it as an industry of real growth in Scotland.
No huge surprises there, I think, David?
No, I think so. It was a bit like sort of motherhood and apple pie, that tourism is good, it can do more to help the industry, and really we want to try and encourage that. Of course, it is an industry which is of great importance to Scotland, something like 180,000 jobs in the economy, and £2.5 billion of the economy, the GDP of the economy, going from tourism each year.
Most of us think of as kind of honorary.
And a dig, of course, against the Labour establishments in Edinburgh and Glasgow for squabbling over the Parliament. I think we're going to hear quite a bit of that sentiment in the course of the weekend.
I think we are, and shortly we'll be hearing Alan Beath speaking, and I think he will be saying he will be getting perhaps an attack, if he can, in on Labour local government in Scotland. He will be trying to take an opportunity, I'm sure, to have a bit of a dig. He is, after all, a politician, at what he sees as Labour sleaze in Paisley and Glasgow.
Paisley politics versus the new politics. And he'll also have a dig at narrow-minded nationalism as well. Because, of course, there's been a lot of speculation in the bars and tea rooms around here about the prospects for the Liberal Democrats in the Scottish Parliament and whether they might be in a position to, if not form a government, at least have a share of power with either the SNP or the Labour Party. But they're not giving anything away, are they?
No, the leadership have been very clear that they're not saying that who they may decide that they would want to join up with in the Scottish Parliament. They would say maybe wanting to hear from either Labour or the SNP. But Jim Wallace, in interviews today and in the past few days, has been very clear to say that he would not join the SNP in any way if they demanded a referendum on independence as one of the first acts of a Scottish Parliament.
And I'm quite certain that we will enjoy listening to him. It's with great pleasure and honour that I ask Alan Beath, Deputy Leader of the Federal Party, to speak to us. Alan.
The Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, Alan Beath, now coming to the rostrum to give his speech.
Well, Mr. President, Scottish Liberal Democrats, thank you very much for your warm welcome. And let me start with a word of thanks and appreciation to my Scottish colleagues at Westminster, so ably led by Jim. They are, in practice, the official opposition in all Scottish business, but they're also massive contributors to our work on United Kingdom issues. Please send us more of the same high standard. And you mind if I say, could you send us some more women as well? I don't mind how you do it. The only other Beath ever to become a Member of Parliament was the Member of Parliament for Inverness districts in 1892. And he wrote a treatise on the Crofter question and church endowments in the Highlands viewed politically and socially. So watch out, Charles. Try as I will, I have not been able to establish any family connection with him whatsoever, which is a pity, since his father was a noted Gaelic preacher but I'm still trying. But there's another reason, in any case, why it's particularly attractive to be speaking to the Scottish Conference. Politics in Scotland has an excitement about it, particularly for Liberal Democrats. I shall explain why in a moment, but first I want to say something about the United Kingdom economy and about public spending. What is most crippling at the moment to industry, to farming, to exporters in Scotland as in the rest of the United Kingdom? It's the high pound. Yet with 11 countries signed up for membership of the European single currency, Britain remains as far outside the Premier League of European nations as ever. We should be setting a clear, firm timetable for British entry into European Monetary Union and identifying a date for an early referendum within that timetable so as to make clear our commitment in principle to joining the single currency. That would enable us to make adjustments to our monetary and fiscal policy and to align our interest rates with those of our European partners, which would bring the pound down to a more sustainable and competitive rate. The pound is attracting funds and going up because there's doubt about whether we will go into monetary union, and jobs are being lost in Scotland as a consequence. On public services, the budget has come and gone, and still class sizes and NHS waiting lists are rising. Our alternative budget outlined clear, costed, specific measures to reverse these trends and to drive up the standards of both services. Gordon Brown's budget simply did not. We set out how substantially more funds could be ploughed into hospitals and schools, and Labour has not matched these sums. On health, talking United Kingdom terms, Labour has so far committed an extra £2 billion to the NHS over the first 2 years of this Parliament. But that's only worth around an extra £800 million in real terms because of higher projected inflation. When you compare that with what we've been putting forward, Liberal Democrats' plans allowed for some £1.1 billion extra over and above inflation in the first 2 years in our general election manifesto, and some £2.8 billion extra over the 2 years in our latest alternative budget. The difference is even greater on education, where Labour has so far committed £2.5 billion over the whole lifetime of this Parliament, compared with some £10 billion in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, now as then raised by putting an extra penny on the basic rate of income tax. Even this overstates Labour's additional commitments, since higher inflation has wiped around £1 billion in real terms off their spending plans. And we can all see what the consequences are. So your members at Westminster have a key job to do in continuing, under Malcolm Bruce's leadership in the Treasury team, to harry the government on their failure to safeguard essential public services. But I say that politically, Scotland is now an exciting place to be. The decision of the Scottish people to restore a Scottish Parliament has opened the door to a modern, cooperative style of politics, while Westminster's Parliament remains a museum of all that is worst in parliamentary practice, time-wasting, name-calling and confrontation. Edinburgh's Parliament can break new ground. Indeed, it will have to. Fair voting by proportional representation means no more one-party politics. There is no room for Labour's Glasgow style of government or Paisley style politics when parties do not have artificial majorities. Indeed, one of the first acts of the Scottish Parliament should be to bring in fair votes for local government, clear out the rotting stables. That is the one thing that will clean up the mess of Labour's municipal power. And there's no room for the sleazy arrogance which typified Tory government when parties have to look beyond their own ranks to win majorities for what they want to do. And there's no room for narrow-minded forms of nationalism to shackle Scotland's Parliament when PR makes certain that the whole range of Scottish opinion, represented by different parties, has to be taken into account. Of course, there'll be debate, There'll be argument, there'll be conflict, there will be disappointment in the new politics of Scotland. But no party or section will be in a position to abuse power without effective challenge, and there will be a premium on reaching consensus. It is Liberal Democrats who made this fundamental change possible by holding out for fair votes throughout the Constitutional Convention. It wasn't our rather meagre money in the Yes campaign, but our political muscle in the Convention which secured this reform for the Scottish people. And it's Liberal Democrats in large numbers in the new Parliament who can make it work best. We will be fighting for election with the strength and confidence of a growing and independent party, tied to no one and firm in our own values and our own beliefs. But many traditional Labour supporters will need to ask themselves, why send Blair supporters to Edinburgh when their policies will be dictated from London anyway? And some who voted nationalist in the past can now say, we've got a parliament, now we can vote according to what kind of policies we want for Scotland, what kind of Scotland we want. Liberal Democrat commitments on the economy, public services and freedom have a large potential appeal for those voters. And for Scotland's remaining Conservatives, the question is even simpler. Why elect a party which told you that you were not fit to have your own parliament? They said it would be a disaster. So presumably only the interest of most of them, except for that very small number who stuck it out in favour of devolution, is to wreck the parliament, like the Irish party at Westminster in the 19th century. In fact, the Tories are getting more and more stupid in their behaviour at Westminster, and more like the behaviour of the Irish party in those 19th century years. About 20 Tories kept the House of Commons up all night last week, apparently in order to delay a vote to ban corporal punishment in the sort of minor public boarding schools which most of them attended. Regular beating never did them any harm, they said. It moulded their character. I'm afraid it turned them into permanent schoolboys. And there's nothing more like a load of public schoolboys than the Tory party at Westminster when it sets to on those sort of tactics. Now, Liberal Democrats are struggling to modernise Westminster. Not so much the customs and historical features which give it a bit of colour and continuity, but the mindless time wasting, the things which confuse the public and the things which prevent new laws from being carefully considered. You know, there's a terrible crush in the voting lobbies because there is a very large government majority. And after the election, we suggested having 3 clerks instead of 2 on duty to tick off the names in the voting lobbies just to speed things up. Oh, no, we couldn't do that. There have always been 2 clerks. Couldn't possibly have a 3rd clerk. It's a change. But apparently, the clerk to the committee went away and discovered that there had once been 3 clerks before, in 1906. So it was all right. We could have 3 clerks. Now you know why it happened in 1906. Because there was such a huge Liberal majority in 1906. But it just goes to show that you have to prove that it's happened before for any change to be made at Westminster at all. That is the contrast between what happens at Westminster and what you can do in a Scottish Parliament. Liberal Democrats want a Scotland which will be free, successful, caring of its own people, outward-looking, and confident of its role in the United Kingdom, in Europe, and in the world. Much of our philosophy was nourished in Scotland, and we are now alone among the parties in having a clear and accepted set of beliefs and values on which our policies are based. Freedom and opportunity for the individual, mutual responsibility in communities, diversity, pluralism, and respect for the views of others, the rule of law, internationalism, the recognition that we are trustees of the environment and must safeguard it for future generations, These are values which matter to Scotland's future. They're not in dispute amongst Liberal Democrats. We didn't invent them yesterday. We are not, like Scottish Tories, desperately looking round for a new name, a new colour, a new philosophy, anything which isn't damaged goods, if I use the phrase that they themselves are using. We haven't, like the Labour Party, abandoned the values upon which we were built up because they simply wouldn't work and couldn't be sold to the people of this country, casting around, looking for something which is modern without knowing what is its philosophical or ideological basis. What we argue in policy terms stems from what we believe, from values we hold. They are values which have a new opportunity to flourish in Scotland's new political system, and I wish you well as you set about winning success for those values. Thank you very much.
The Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats there, Alan Beath, with a speech which has been very well received. A speech where he told the Scottish Liberal Democrats that they could break new political ground with the new Scottish Parliament. As you would expect in a speech from a Liberal Democrat, there was criticism for both the Conservatives and for the Labour Party. He criticised the Conservatives for being what he described at Westminster, a load of public schoolboys, and he criticised the Labour Party for the...
Thank you, Alan. That reception tells you it all. I'm about to leave the platform. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank my aide, who has
He
disappeared.
criticised the Labour Party for what he said was the sleaze in local government. He criticised both the Paisley and Glasgow situations, and he said that Labour had not done anything to address that. We've got a slight movement on the top table now, while there's a bit of rearranging going on ahead of the next motion, which is motion number 3 on Community Care. This is a motion being brought by Glasgow Rutherglen. Basically, the motion will welcome the introduction of the Community Care Act and the Children Act, but they are concerned at what they say are the risk of abuse to vulnerable people, particularly in residential care, and what they call the overload, often conflicting duties of the social work departments. That debate will be coming up very shortly. The conference is just getting itself together, settling itself down after that speech by Alan Beath. Indeed, there was some concern here at Inverness that the speech was made by the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats and not the party leader himself. Paddy Ashdown at the moment is actually away at a conference on Bosnia, and we're told that he actually asked Jim Wallace if he could have permission not to come to this conference this year, because indeed he wanted to go to discuss details about Bosnia, and Jim Wallace said, well, yes, you're very welcome not to come this year, but we would certainly like to see you in the future. Donald Gorrie on the platform, one of the MPs who won election to Westminster for Edinburgh in the last election.
The next motion is on community care. We are inviting cards for speakers on this motion. It will terminate at 4 o'clock when Councillor Liz Harris will take over the chair with Ian Ewell as aide. We have, in fact, 3 different amendments into this motion.
So we're now just getting the details of how the community care motion will work. We're just being told who's going to actually be chairing this debate and how the amendments are going to fall. This part of the technical process that the conference goes through.
Craig of Rutherglen to come to the platform. I'll just read to you the revised version of Amendment 1. Replace 1 with the establishment of a recognised
just
system
giving us
of
some of the new motions which are being put on this motion. It is a very, very long motion. There are 2 amendments to it: Edinburgh South and Inverness, East Lane and Lochaber.
C. The appropriate resourcing of social work services, whether they should remain within the remit of local government or be under the direct jurisdiction of the Scottish Parliament. And D.
Well, let's actually leave now and cross to Ian, who's outside the hall, who's in the foyer with some guests.
Thanks, David, and I'm joined now by Councillor Ian Smith of North East Fife and Councillor John Morrison of East Dunbarton. So, John Morrison, rather poor turnout today.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, really. I mean, Inverness is quite far in the north, and we're here, and a lot of people, I think, will be joining us for the rest of the weekend. But I'm sure it was a reasonable turnout. There's quite a few people floating around the conference today, and I'm quite happy with that.
Well, a lot of empty seats in there, Ian Smith. Isn't that rather extraordinary, given the imminence of the Scottish parliamentary elections?
It's quite a large hall, I think. That's part of the problem, and that's one of the reasons why it looks more empty than I think it is. There are people coming all the time, and there's a lot of buzz around, as you'll know from wandering around. There are a lot of people visiting the stalls, having meetings in the coffee bar, as they tend to at conferences. And I think the first afternoon of the conference does tend to be a little quiet in the hall. It'll get better as the weekend goes on.
Of course, your leader didn't turn up either, did he, John Morrison? Paddy Ashdown is away. Was Alan Beath rather second best?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it was very much a solid performance from Alan Beath. We laid out the stall for the Scottish Parliament elections. We gave a commitment to attempt to end the one-party states in council chambers across Scotland, which I'm sure will be welcome to a lot of people. And we talked about how the Liberal Democrats' policies are much more radical than the Labour Party's. I think we've done well.
Well, in one policy you aren't actually more radical than Labour, are you, on tax in the Scottish Parliament? Because Malcolm Bruce is saying there should be a moratorium on tax raising for at least the first 2 years of the Scottish Parliament. Do you think that's wise?
I think the party is still to determine its manifesto. We will be going into the election with a commitment to improve education, improve health, and if that requires more money to be spent and more tax, then we will raise that money. But the manifesto will be determined by the Scottish Party.
John Morrison, do you think the party should retain the right to raise taxes?
I think we have always been very clear that if it's necessary, we are prepared to raise taxes. We went into the general election firmly committed to raising an extra penny on income tax for education. I'm sure that if we get to the position where we're in a government, either ourselves or in coalition, that we will be looking at our commitments and how those are going to be funded.
Yes, so you would propose possibly using the tartan tax in the first term of the Scottish Parliament?
Yes, I mean, if there is to be a moratorium, obviously any new government that comes in is going to have to look around. There's going to be a settling down period, and there's going to be a time when we're going to have to set out what the priorities are. So Malcolm Bruce is simply being prudent, as I would expect any party preparing for government to be.
If you have to share power, Ian Smith, would you do it with the Labour Party or with the Scottish National Party?
We'll not make any decisions on any power sharing until after the election. We'll go into the election for the Scottish Parliament with a distinctive Scottish Liberal Democrat manifesto, and we will try our best to win power. If we don't have enough to form an overall majority, we'll do a deal with the party which delivers most of our manifesto.
The question won't go away though, will it, John Morrison?
No, the question won't go away, and it's a question which we've been asked repeatedly, but we always answer, we've got our policies, we'll fight the election in the Scottish Parliament on those policies, and it's a question of how we deliver them. That's what we are trying to do, and if we deliver it in a coalition government, then that's an important feature from our point of view for the people of Scotland.
Briefly, is gender balance going to happen?
I think it's difficult to happen because the Labour Party have failed to amend the legislation in a way which allows it to be legal, so it's going to be difficult.
Ian Smith, John Morrison, thank you very much. Back to David in the conference.
Thank you very much, Ian, and that's where we come to the end of our coverage from the Eden Court Theatre in Inverness for this afternoon, where we've heard the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Alan Beath, say that the new Scottish Parliament could break new political ground. Just a reminder that we'll be back with highlights at 10 to 11 tonight on BBC One Scotland, and we'll have further live coverage from the Scottish Liberal Democrats conference at 3:20 tomorrow afternoon on BBC Two Scotland. But for now, good afternoon.
You start there.